Texans general manager Nick Caserio spoke at the combine. He had some interesting things to say. I have 5 takeaways, and then something he said that I think is the worst thing that I've heard from Caserio and DeMeco Ryans, and it quite frankly makes me feel like I'm in the dark days of Texans football, which weren't too long ago. But it's got to be stopped. Like we got to stop saying this and hanging our hat on this type of thing if you're going to be a big boy general manager and a big boy head coach. So there's something he said that needs to be put on the back burner. I'll be in Indianapolis interviewing the prospects tomorrow. Myself and Cody Stoots got you covered at SNL. But let's hop right into it. Nick Caserio, a lot of times there's some word salad, as people will call it. I thought he was pretty good today. Thought number one from Caserio's press conference, he said he looks at things in 2-year windows, which I think is kind of apparent. We've seen, for the most part, 2-year contracts handed out. Even the most that they've paid a free agent, Danielle Hunter, that was a 2-year contract. So I don't hate that philosophy. My only concern is this. If you're approaching things in 2-year windows, which I think is healthy, does that mean that you're more willing to give crappy contract extensions in that 2-year window as if that's how you're going to be aggressive? In other words, instead of making a long commitment to an elite player like a Saquon Barkley, does that mean that you're going to give extensions to Shaq Mason or Dalton Schultz? And Dalton Schultz basically got a 2-year deal that was hefty. Shaq Mason, the Titus Howard extension, really only 2 years of consequence. So I like how he says he looks at things in 2-year windows. I would wonder, I don't think he would admit, but I wonder if that kind of is connected to that mindset, that philosophy. While there's been some benefits of it, I wonder if that's kind of connected to some of the recklessness with some of the contract extensions that kind of prevented this team from fully capitalizing on CJ Stroud's rookie deals. So I like the philosophy. It's not set in stone. He talked about flexibility, 2-year windows. Cool. I'll put it this way. You're not going to be able to look at a 2-year window when you have CJ Stroud and Will Anderson and you're paying those guys. Derek Stingley's not signing a 2-year deal. So the 2-year philosophy is interesting. They have a really strong ability to pivot and change the course. But I just wonder if that philosophy is why we've seen some of the bad extensions that we've seen, where it's basically like, we can wipe our hands of it in 2 years and it's nothing to see, but it kind of holds you back when it comes to the 2-year window. Speaking of that offensive line, he also had something real interesting to say about the offensive line. We'll get to that in a sec. But first, thought two from the Caserio alleged salad, word salad that is. He said DeMeco Ryans is old school in some ways. I would like to know what that means and what those ways are. And I'm not sitting here saying that's like a missed opportunity for a follow-up. But he was praising DeMeco, talking about how much he loved him, talking about how great they are. He'd go to war with this guy, loves him as a person. Sometimes he sits and thinks, and DeMeco sits and thinks, and the other one's talking. And he said DeMeco is old school in some ways. What does old school mean? Like, what does old school mean? Because a lot of times when you say old school, when you describe a football coach as old school, there can be some good things, but a lot of times it can be the inability to be innovative. Stubbornness. There's a lot of guys who say, I don't like that. I'm old school. So we see the Texans, the state of the offense right now. We know DeMeco Ryans is a good coach. He said he's one of the best head coaches in the NFL. I don't think anyone would dispute that. I'm ride and die with DeMeco. But when he says old school, that doesn't really seem like something that's always a good thing. So I wonder, like, what ways is DeMeco Ryans old school? Does that mean he wants to play smash mouth football and lean on the defense, and we're going to see the assets dedicated to the defense as we've seen the majority of the assets? I would love to know, like, what ways is DeMeco Ryans old school? And with all the teams that we see have success that are willing to be innovative and open things up, and they're namely the teams that the Texans are chasing. I think you can look at the Eagles as one of those prime examples. Kansas City's been willing to change things up. Andy Reid's done that. Baltimore, Buffalo, they've had the willingness. Mike Tomlin's kind of described as old school, and they've kind of been on a mediocre treadmill. Now, a lot of that has to do with the quarterback, but when you say old school, I wonder what that means with DeMeco Ryans. We're going through Nick Casario's 5 biggest takeaways and the worst thing he said at the NFL Combine during his media availability. I'll be on the scene. My flight actually takes off very shortly. But we're going through these real quick. Thought 3, he said the next step. He said he doesn't know what the next step is. He said, yeah, are we ready to take the next step? What is the next step? Some people will say, well, you get to the AFC Championship game. You've never done that. I look, there's a lot of times where the result, and this kind of goes back to the early philosophy of Caserio, the process over results. Like, you can have a really, really good thing going, and sometimes the ball doesn't bounce your way, and it's not just tangibly measured. Eventually, the tangible measurements will matter, but there's a gray area that comes with football. For example, like if Jaden Daniels and let's say Washington loses their first playoff game, or let's say they lose the game to the Lions. Like, is anyone going to sit here and say that Washington isn't in good position? Like if the Texans, when they were playing the Colts 2 years ago, I'll localize this. If the Colts beat them in week 18, let's say they don't drop that pass and they end up winning the division, like heading into the next offseason, do you feel any worse that the Texans didn't make the playoffs? Sometimes things don't go your way. So I agree with him when he says, I don't know what the next step is. Like a lot of times you get to a Super Bowl or bust point, and very few teams are fortunate to get to that point. Texans aren't quite there. And I don't know that there's like just a measurable, like, hey, they can take the next step. I mean, you've seen teams fluke their way kind of to the AFC Championship game. So the next step, Nick Caserio doesn't know. I don't really know. I would say the next step would be figure something out on the offensive line to where they don't look incompetent. And a year from now, put us in position to where we feel really, really, really good about not just CJ Stroud's ability, but his surroundings and the ability to put him in good position. I would say that's probably the next step. It's going to be all about the quarterback because he's going to be extension eligible after this year. Thought 4 from Casario's word salad at the Combine, allegedly. He was tooting his own horn. He was horn tooting for sure. He brought up the Blake Cashman move. Great job developing. I did like the example he used about the Eagles and their ability to find guys this offseason as opposed to being aggressive. I think I like it because I've been saying it. But he brought Cashman into the mix, and then he also mentioned finding Nico Collins. So, hey, you're up there, national media, all that. You got you're sitting there dressed to the nines. You're asked about Howie Roseman. Go ahead and flex on him, Nick. And he was definitely tooting his own horn, which I'm not going to judge him for doing. Final thought before we get to the worst thing that Nick Caserio said, and maybe some other small nugs. Thought 5. This is interesting. He said that the players like Cole Popovich, who, those of you that may not know, is the new offensive line coach for the Texans. He worked with Caserio in New England. He also worked with new OC Nick Caserio, and he was the assistant O-line coach. An offensive line that was one of the worst in the league last year. He said the players like Popovich. How does that make you feel? Like, does that really matter? Like they liked him? Do they think he was giving good ideas and the ideas were getting over? I know that DeMeco Ryans talked about the line of communication and having one voice with the offensive line. So maybe that's it. But the players, like the offensive linemen, like Cole Popovich, does that mean that they just think that this is going to solve everything? Was it all Bobby Slowick's fault? I don't know. That does seem to be the theme. And that's the best case scenario, that it's all Bobby Slowick's fault. But man, the players like Cole Popovich, good for them. I don't know. I don't know if that's supposed to make anyone feel any better or worse about the decision. Next one, and this is just kind of a little nug. This has been the most popular national topic. I side with Nick Caserio when it comes to the tush push. I think it's weird if you're going to bail a play where not only do the Eagles basically it's a cheat code for them on short yardage. Everyone else looks like a monkey trying to F a football when they try to run the tush push. Like they asked Sean McDermott about it, and he was kind of critical. Brother, you tried it multiple times against Kansas City, and you looked stupid. Like we talk about the spots and all that. I mean, they tried it, and they looked completely lost. And most teams do. And I thought Caserio brought up a good point We remember the viral video of Jalen Hurts squatting 600 pounds. That might be coming into account as to why that play is so effective. It's not as simple as someone's pushing on his butt. He squats 600 pounds. And oh, by the way, whether it was Jason Kelsey or someone else, they executed. So if we're going to get in the business, and I thought Caserio broke this down perfectly. I have the full interview available in the description, the full media availability, I should say. Like, if we're going to get in the business of every time one team does something elite, we just eliminate it, I think it's a very dangerous territory. It would be one thing if everybody was doing this effectively, but everybody's not doing this effectively. So I side with Nick Caserio on this. Maybe because I want to soften him up, because he said the one thing that I think is the most annoying thing that DeMeco Ryans and Nick Caserio have both said the last couple of years when talking about the Houston Texans and talking about being close. He talked about the close crap. He talked about, well, you look at last year, we played this many one-possession games, and, you look at how close it was and blah, blah, blah. That's every year. In 2022, the Texans had the second worst team in the NFL. They were trash. They were awful. It was bad. As a result, they ended up getting CJ Stroud. Some would say they weren't even trying to win. We were right there along for the ride, right here in the locker room and on the radio. You know how many one-score games the Texans lost that year? They lost 6. They lost 6 one-possession ball games that year. Anyone who gambles on the NFL knows that even the worst team versus the best team, the line is going to be around 5 or 6. Anyone who gambles knows that. We hear it all the time. We hear DeMeco Ryans say it. We hear Nick Caserio say it. Yeah, these guys are professionals too. Every game is close. It's the NFL. It's hard to win in the NFL, blah, 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 blah. I understand a bad team saying that. Like, if Lovie Smith is trying to defend himself and keep his job, I understand him saying that. But when you're the Texans, and by the way, they got the brakes smacked out of them a couple of times by really good teams. They got smacked around by Minnesota. They got smacked around by Baltimore. And there were other games where maybe the scoreboard didn't resemble how much they were getting dominated. The Tennessee game kind of comes to mind. The close thing is a given in the NFL. That's not something you hang your hat on. That's something crappy football teams hang their hat on. So when I heard Nick Caserio say that, I really rolled my eyes, and I've heard DeMeco say it as well. Like, on one hand, we talk about it as accepted fact, and I think that's right. But whenever DeMeco goes up there and he goes hardo and he talks about, games are close, it's the NFL, they're professionals, it's hard to win, blah, blah, blah. I agree with you. I agree with Nick Caserio. So let's not act like it's some sort of badge of honor, because I can promise you, spoiler alert, regardless of whether they take this next step or not, regardless of whether they improve as a football team or they get worse, there's going to be one-possession games. So if you're going to say this, you're going to be able to say this every single year. But on one hand, it's, yeah, games are close, guys are professionals. And on the other hand, it's, yeah, we played some close ball games and blah, blah, blah. Everybody did that. A majority of NFL teams had one-possession games. Go through the betting lines any given week. It's one possession. This isn't college. This isn't college where you have 3 touchdown favorites. It doesn't happen. It happens less than a handful of times over the course of the season. More times than not, it's going to be one possession. They know that. Let's not hang the hat on that. Those days are done. That's a Lovie Smith thing. That's not a DeMeco Ryans, Nick Caserio thing. Let's move past that. Process over results, blah, blah, blah. Thing of the past. That was awful by Nick Caserio. What did you think of what you heard from Caserio? If you missed it, the full link is in the description. A little bit of word salad, some pretty interesting stuff, and the worst thing that him and DeMeco Ryans have said this offseason. I'll be live at the Combine interviewing prospects. Offense, offense, offense. This team needs offense. They need skill position guys. They need running backs, and they probably could use a tight end. Those guys are going to speak the next couple of days. I'm about to get on a plane, hop to Indianapolis, and we got you covered. Always remember, whether it's here, whether it's on SNL, when it comes to this Texan stuff, we're all in it together. Save the salad, Nick.